Thanks, Tom. It's beginning to feel a little bit like the Today Show. When I get up tomorrow morning, I'm going to be calling you guys just to make sure that everything's okay. I'm Mark Gabriel, and I'm very pleased to be here. And want to also thank you for taking time out of your busy Saturday mornings, or maybe not busy Saturday mornings. I'm currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Western Area Power Administration, also known as WAPA. For those of you who aren't familiar, we take the power from 56 hydro facilities and put it out across 17,000 miles of transmission. I like to say that I'm a DUG, which is a dumb old utility guy. I've been involved for almost 30 years, from the very smallest utilities to obviously running one of the largest in the country today. I've had experience in water, electric, and gas, and I think more importantly to me, I've had a lot of experience working with communities and community groups over the years, because this is truly a partnership between all of you and the utility. A number of years ago, back in 2009, I was working in Arizona to develop what became known as Solar Future Arizona. This was an interesting challenge as you think about Arizona, but in 2009 there were only 4,000 solar rooftops. And the study was to figure out the stakeholder process. What do you do in a state when massive amounts of solar power come into the system? And you have basically what I'll describe as three different parties involved in the room. You obviously have the solar advocates who are very strong. You also have the folks running the utilities, both the investor-owned utilities and certainly the municipal entities. And you have the ratepayers who were caught in the dilemma of which way do we go. We had 21 stakeholder meetings over the course of a year. Sometimes we were meeting 3 times a week. We coupled that with very heavy analytics to understand what was going to be the impacts of massive amounts of solar on distribution, transmission, and system planning out into the future. What resulted was 3 years later, there were over 40,000 rooftops in Arizona. The utilities were still able to survive and function very well. And the community really weaned itself from different sources of generation. What was required was to make sure that there was a lot of collaboration, a lot of talking, a lot of education, a lot of understanding. We are sitting today in the energy and water space at an interesting junction. It's the first time in the last 30 years that we finally have the technology at the end of the pipes and the end of the wires and the will of folks to think about a different solution. When I look at CSU, it's got phenomenal opportunity because it's got all 4 services. The ability to balance when water is pumped, the ability to use the technologies at the end of the home or at the end of the business or at the end of the commercial facility will require a different way of thinking. We're going to move more and more into a networked world, and that's going to require a lot of collaboration, a lot of cooperation, and a lot of understanding. Because remember, we have what I tend to call the trilemma, right? On one hand, you have reliability. Everyone has an expectation of power and power quality. We have to have that, just the nature of the world. On the other hand, we've got affordability. We've got members of the community who cannot afford a Tesla or a Powerwall or solar panel on their home. So we've got to understand what the affordability function is. And clearly, we've got the environment, which is at the core. It's really important from my perspective for any utility, especially a public power utility, to make sure all of those pieces are in balance. The great news is this is, to me, the most exciting time in the last 50 years in these businesses. We're going to have to figure out how to use water differently. We're going to have to figure out how to leverage all those technologies that are out there, that are sitting in your home today that may not be levered as well as they could. And that's the exciting thing. And an organization like CSU, which is already a leader in many areas, has got a leg up on virtually every one of the other folks in the state and many around the West. And last but not least, I believe we're going to have a more interconnected future, whether it's from the home all the way through to the work that we've all been doing together to make sure that there's a successful market in the West, so we can take advantage of renewable energy, we can take advantage of the hydropower that we've got, and we can take advantage of everybody's system, because all the needs of the communities need to be met in a different fashion. So again, I'm looking forward to any of the questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Good to see everybody here on a Saturday morning. My name's Eric Tharp. I'm the acting CEO. I've been doing that acting job for about 4 months. I've been in Colorado Springs for about 4 years, serving in Colorado Springs Utilities And prior to that, I spent 33 years in Los Angeles at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Two hallmarks of my career have been efficiency and innovation. And many people say that in the next 10 years, the utility business is going to change more than it did in the last 100 years. So I think for us to be successful, we're going to have to be really good at innovation and efficiency. And I would like to share just 2 examples of efficiency things that I have worked on, 2 examples of innovation that I have worked on in my career. One each from Los Angeles and one in Colorado Springs. In terms of efficiency in Los Angeles, we were looking at a power plant that was about halfway through its life cycle. And we thought, what can we do to make this plant more efficient? And so we went out and surveyed the market and found technologies that we could install in the boiler, in the turbine, and in the cooling system that would add 140 megawatts of output to that plant. That saved us over $15 million a year going forward. In terms of innovation, I had a group of people working for me, and I told them, you're really not doing a good job if you can't find $1 million to cut out of your budget cost savings every year. You need to look around, find ways to carve out costs from our business or find new ways to do things. Bigger, lighter, cheaper, faster, quicker. And one of the things that we did, we found a company that would pay us $6 million to treat our coal and reduce the emissions from that. So that was saving us $6 million every year from an innovation that one of our employees developed. Coming to Colorado Springs, talking about efficiency, all of you know that the building boom has been great since 2014, 2015, and not just new homes, but also existing homes that wanted to add either a new air conditioner or some kind of panel upgrade. And we found that the crews that we had to do that weren't able to keep up. And the gentleman that was over that group, his name was Tyler, he came to me and he said, he would call me about every other week and he would say, I'm concerned about the backlog. It's just getting too big. And so he says, I'm going to authorize overtime. So we said, okay. And he called me 2 weeks later, I still can't keep up. I'm going to authorize working on Saturday. And I said, okay, whatever you need to do. And then a few weeks later, he said, we're still not keeping up, and I don't want to authorize working on Sunday. I want to have people have at least one day off a week. And so I said to him, why don't you call one of the supervisors in another area who has employees that are trained and could do what your crews are doing. Let's get this, see if you could borrow some labor from them. He called Joe. Joe said, sure, I'll give you a crew at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, and the backlog was reduced dramatically. And that was just sharing resources across business units, which you would think is easy to do, but it's sometimes not the thing that people think about. In terms of innovation, last year, near the end of the year, I got a call from a local research scientist, and he said, I'm working on a grant proposal for the Department of Energy, and it's augmented reality that we would like to see how we could apply that to the utility business. How could you use this augmented reality through glasses that the crews out in the field could be quicker on making their repairs, that they could be more efficient in fixing things that maybe don't break that often. So we're working with them. They said, would you be the utility that will work with us? I said, yes, we will. They were successful in getting the grant. We're working with them now and hoping that we can bring new efficiencies to our field crews. As we go forward, we're going to be seeing much more technology and sensors placed out on the grid. It will help us operate our system more efficiently, to be more cost effective, to reduce outage time, and it'll also provide us information that we can provide along to our customers. So I look forward to the future. I'm happy to be a part of it.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, everyone. Thank you you for being here on a Saturday. This is an honor to have all these people show up on a day where they can enjoy this beautiful weather. So I'll start. My name is Aaron Benjamin, and I'll give you a little bit of background on where I was and where I am today. Today I'm the general manager of CSU's energy supply, so all the generation supplying energy to the Colorado Springs utilities is in my division. And I also have the fuels marketing and the 24/7 operations of buying and selling electricity and gas in the operation. So half the budget of CSU goes through my division, and that's about 300 employees that I manage here. Prior to being the general manager of CSU, I started at LADWP, LA Water and Power, in 1980 as an engineer. And I've made my way through the ranks, and I became the head of the entire power system of the city of Los Angeles, which kind of spanned over 4 states with a portfolio of coal. Over 50% of the generation of LADWP was coal when I took over in 2008. And we had nuclear, and we had hydro, and we had a little bit of renewables at that time. We had about 6% renewables until 2008. Fast forward, I had enough time to make lots of mistakes and learn and make my way through the planning process. By the time, at the end of my career at LADWP, we had made plans to get off all 50% of the energy generation from coal was converted to something that we were going to do down the road. We had plans in place for the next 50 years to stop using coal because of the laws that were put in place, and also increase renewables in our system to almost 33% renewables, with using the same assets that we had put in place for coal generation that was used to bring power to the city of Los Angeles. With all these changes that were happening, what I want to kind of emphasize more, and we can talk more about that, is that these long-term planning became part of our existence as far as the organization and the survival of what the future holds for us, in order for us to be more innovative and make sure that everything that we're doing is not for the next 5 years or 10 years. We looked 50 years down the road and figured out ways. For example, conservation of energy was part of our plan. On energy and water side, we've done things like put in the transmission corridors that we've had in the city. There's acres and acres of empty land that we used it for capturing the rainstorm water, cleaning it up, and then using it back into the golf courses and using it as gray water to make sure that we're not stressing the drinking water system. We've done integration of the hydro plants that we had and the water conveyance that we had to use it more efficiently, use it as a battery storage. We talk about batteries as we know them, but we had an asset that we've repowered in order for us to use pump storage as a battery for our renewables, and we call that our natural battery that we used in the system. Was 1,200 megawatts of hydropower plant, and I was involved in the field, when we repowered it, and there was a plan for us to make sure that there was a hub for renewables. So as we talk more about the future, I think I've been 38 years in the public sector, done a lot of mistakes throughout my careers, figured out that the best way for us to do is really have a long-term view of what the future of the community is, and I think I can bring that kind of outlook to CSU and make sure that we are looking far into the future and make sure that this community, there is the most beautiful place to live, and the community that really has a lot of ownership in living and having quality of life here, that we are all partners in what the future holds.
From my perspective, there's 3 keys. In education, we've got to be transparent. Everyone needs to understand what are the costs, what are the puts and takes, what are the trade-offs that we have to make in the selection of both power and renewables from that perspective, energy efficiency, and demand response. Now, part of what this is going to take is a different way of thinking. I envision the utility over the next 3 to 5 years to truly becoming a network provider. So what does that mean? So that if an individual is putting a solar panel on their home, or an apartment building is putting batteries in their garage, we've got to be able to manage the system in a way that is different than we do today. A traditional thought is that we've got to figure out how to balance capacity with energy. But what we're seeing across the country is consumers getting engaged. And by that I mean everything from commercial and industrial down to the end consumer. It's going to require a different way of thinking. It's going to require a way to understand what are the trade-offs. And Eric's 100% correct. Today, we're getting great low prices on the energy component of the system. But remember, running an electric grid requires both energy and capacity. When the sun goes down, we need to figure out how to manage that. From my perspective, it's exciting because we have end of pipe and end of wire technologies that we haven't had. These are things we only dreamt about 25 years ago. Today we've got the three components. We've got the technology, we've got the intelligence, and we've got the will. And those are three components in particular a community like Colorado Springs can take advantage of much quicker than anyone else. But I want to go back to the first point, and that's education and transparency. Everything that we do needs to be out there. And I would suggest if you'd like to see a good example, not that I'm shilling for where I currently work, but if you go to wapit.gov and look at the source, we post every single document, all financials, all decisions that we make in terms of power supply are up there for everyone to see so that they can be educated and understand what's going on.
Okay, the question is, how do we educate our customers about renewables and conservation, and how it compares cost-wise with fossil fuel energy? And it's true that today we see solar and wind prices that are very competitive with the fossil fuel, in some cases maybe even cheaper over the long term. The problem we have today with renewables is they're not available 24 hours a day. The sun is available about a third, maybe 40% of the time, and the wind maybe half of the time. And it's difficult. You have to put something with the renewables if you're going to count on it to run your system. And so we're working on battery options, which today are still a little too expensive. We're anticipating that battery prices will be reduced in the future. We look forward to that. We've been including battery options in all of our RFPs for the last 2 or 3. And we're starting with some demonstration projects in the next year or 2 with batteries. I think our customers are already very well educated on the prices of the various energy supplies. We're trying to be transparent in placing on our website all of the information related to Drake and Drake replacement, and we will continue to make available to our customers this information.
I'll start with the education part. I think the CSU being in a position of having all 4 utilities, which are the essence of life and growth of the city, I think the education, in my opinion, we have a lot of room to grow in the schools, when we're teaching school kids about the value of these resources, these precious resources that we have, before we even touch on the supply side. I think we have room to grow to make sure that every drop of water that we use in here, we look at it as a precious resource. And we need to figure out a way to combine the efficiencies of these services with each other to make sure that we're complementing each other as a utility, number 1. Number 2, there's a lot of room for collaboration with the policymakers when it comes to standards of housing and standards of efficiencies. When we're building new houses, there's no reason, and price-wise might not be that big of an impact for us, to make sure those homes that we're building have a landscape that are beautiful, they're wise, water-wise, and they're using resources, very efficiently as we build these things. The construction of those homes need to be prepared for if the consumer wants to put solar on their rooftops, that we need to make sure those are safely done and they're educated in whether the payback for them is worth it or not. And if you combine that with storage in their homes, as a utility, we need to be ahead of the game as far as the technology to make sure that those things are happening. The reality is we cannot tap into the supply side all the time. We cannot build power plants. Those days are gone where we built 1,000 megawatts of power plant, throw a bunch of wires into the communities, and and supply energy to them. Those days are gone. We need to figure out a smarter way for the city to sustain itself, whether it's electric vehicles or efficiency or zoning ordinances that actually makes the quality of life higher without really stressing the resources that we have. It's not going to get any better, both on the energy side and on the water side. As we go forward, this is going to be an issue that we have to deal with. The sooner we educate, I think the generations are better than before, understanding the value of these resources. The best thing to do is to save that 1 kilowatt hour on the energy side that you don't have to waste. Then otherwise we have to keep on hitting the supply side and getting that generation to balance the load. So with technology and the education that we can do with the collaboration of the policymakers, the zoning, and the whole city planning, I think this problem can be minimized rather than solving the huge problem of supply and demand. We should really focus on how these resources are used. The state of Israel uses the same drop of water 10 times because they don't have the water. They have to figure out, and we have the brain power to do this here before we get to the crisis mode and figure it out, because we are going to get there, but it's 20 years or 30 years down the road, we are going to get there. The sooner we get that figured out, the better we're going to be.
After the physical safety of our employees and, of course, the public, cybersecurity is the thing that keeps me awake at night. I happen, because of my position in the Department of Energy, to have the top security clearance that you can get in the country. And that gives me both very little comfort and lots of comfort. Very little comfort in the sense that my every other week briefing does give me continual cause for concern. I also sit on the Electricity Sector Coordinating Council, which is 30 CEOs from across the United States. And we formed a joint network to understand what happens it's equivalent to the mutual aid that we do when you've got a storm. It's the same thing on the cyber side. I think most importantly, what we really worked on is to make sure that we've got cyber hygiene. At WAPA, we get somewhere between 5 and 6 million hits on our firewall every month. Okay, I want to scale that for you. 5 to 6 million every month. Over the past 5.5 years, we've had 0 true intrusions. Now, what does that take? The CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, reports to me, as well as our Chief Information Officer. But that reporting is not enough. Cyber hygiene is the critical thing for all of us. Now, we've done some technical things. We pioneered a concept which is a secure enclave. So the way utilities work, and whether it's water, electric, gas, you've got SCADA systems, supervisory control and data acquisition. Historically, that's been the point where people try to get in. Right? They come into the business system through email, through Excel, and all of those things, which was the case in the Ukraine. By the way, if you haven't made sure to update all your systems, I would urge you to do that. Right? In the case of the Ukraine, more than 70% of the software was bootleg software. And the 30% that they hadn't patched. So the way we look at it, the way I look at it, is to make sure your systems are always patched. You've got the most up-to-date software. And again, in WAPA's case, we created a secure enclave, and what that allows us to do, instead of having 4 or 5 separate systems that are floating out there, we have to have different people look at it. What we've done is we've consolidated the way that we view that and have a 24/7 desk. All they do is to watch for these intrusions. That said, the best protection that we can do is to understand what's happening with others. And I will tell you, there's not a week that goes by where I'm not getting a briefing over it. And my intent, should I get this position, is to maintain my security clearance so that the Springs would have that vision. I will also tell you it requires lots and lots and lots of training. The number one weak link are all of us. People clicking on an email, people picking up a memory stick or a CD at a trade show, sticking it in their machine. This hygiene is absolutely critical. And the last point I'll make is, my big worry is the combination between a physical attack and a cyber attack. If you look at what happened in Ukraine, they actually had both. They had a denial of service attack on the telephone system so that people couldn't even report what was happening. It takes constant vigilance, because I'll tell you what, the bad guys are just bad, they're not stupid. And in fact, they've got an asymmetrical advantage to what we do. Every time we build another wall, they figure out a way around it. They're not constrained by budget. They're not constrained by activities. And it is not somebody sitting in the basement. We're dealing with nation-state actors who have already planted things on our system. The day one understanding, when did that bug get into our system? It usually takes 4 to 6 months at the earliest till you find that it's there. So it's constant vigilance, it's patching your system, it's being connected with the other folks in the industry, and just keeping your eyes open. And it takes investment, it takes time, and it takes focus.
Mark, why don't you go ahead and answer the governance question?
Yeah, governance is really, is always interesting to me. I spent my early days as a newspaper reporter covering town council meetings, school board meetings, planning commission meetings, all of those things, 4 nights a week. So I've seen lots of governance on that side. I've also sat on boards, and when I was at the Electric Power Research Institute, managed our board of 30 CEOs. Now, if you can imagine, 2 things happen. Number 1, the CEOs are not the quiet, shy type. And number 2, they're constantly changing, right? You're going to always have movement. It requires lots of education, making sure that the orientation is right, and continual conversation and discussion. I'm convinced over the years there is not one right way to do it. As long as people are well-intended, respectful, and willing to understand and cooperate, all of the structures can work. They all do, except with one, and that's Congress. I've done 300 congressional visits in the last 5 years, and I don't know what to make of that.
Well, I think the previous, Mark and Aaron have talked quite a bit about cybersecurity, and I would echo most of their comments. It is one thing that it keeps us awake at night thinking about what could happen. And where do we get the talent? I'm not a cybersecurity expert, and I don't think either of these 2 gentlemen really are, but we have to rely on experts that we have in the company, and often we find people who used to be on the other side who want to come and be on our side. And we do all of the penetration testings. Just last weekend, I was at a conference, and one of our featured speakers was from Microsoft, and he talked about cybersecurity and what they're doing at Microsoft, things that they have seen in the industry, and there were 25 CEOs there. We all went around the table and talked about horror stories or things that have happened to us or things that we've prevented from happening to us. You need to know what's going on around you and do your best to engineer systems that are difficult to get into. But as Mark said, as soon as you build a wall, they're looking for a way around the wall, and it will be a battle forever. We have people that every time I see them, I say, "How are we doing?" And they say, "Everything is great," and I hope that is, true. But it is a big concern, and we're spending significant dollars and hiring people to try to come in and break into our system and see how they do. But it's something we'll never finish on that game. In terms of governance and the experience of the people on the board, I know some would say, well, none of them worked in the utility business, but I think they bring experience from their history and their backgrounds. Many of them have done strategic planning. Many have done budgets and cases like that. We have some legal expertise on the board. So it's hard to say, well, we should have 3 engineers, and we should have 3 real estate people, or we should have 3 former utility executives. I sometimes worry if you get people that have experience in the industry, it might make it even more difficult to get things through the board because they would want to make every decision. And then what's the point of the staff if they're directing everything that's going on? So I think our governance model is working well in Colorado Springs. In Los Angeles, we had what many would say is the most dysfunctional governance structure of all. And somehow, in spite of all of that, we were still 20% less than our neighbors in terms of price, and we were more reliable. So I think I can work under any governance structure. I'm happy with the one that we have. If we were going to change anything, What I would hope we would do is make sure that the new board, however it's constructed, has the ability to make all of the decisions, and it doesn't go to a second body for ratification. And that's an issue that the board struggled with and went through a table of, I don't remember, 35 different areas where which things would you leave to the board and which things would you decide to have to still go to city council. Having that extra step in there only delays decision making, and as we look to the future, we've got to get faster, not slower.
So I'll answer both questions, but I'll start with the cyber. My experience in Los Angeles was huge in this area because that was a target. It was after New York. LA was we worked with the intelligence agencies. We had a task force of the intelligence agencies representing the FBI, the LAPD. I worked very closely with Charlie Beck, the chief of police of LA that retired just recently. Michael Moore took his place. Both of them I've worked with before they became chief of LAPD. So my interactions with them when he was in charge of the detective group, he was part of that task force, Charlie Beck, when we had to deal with the intelligence agencies and figure out a way for us to get information without compromising the national level, but have some actionable items that we would act on. So there was two parts to it. There was a cybersecurity part, and there was also physical security that we had to deal with. We had a group called Archangel, which was a combination, again, with experts from LAPD, from the FBI, and they would do threat assessments, and they would give us that information for us to do physical protection of the physical dams and substations and transmission lines and all those things. So that's one part of my experience of it. On the cybersecurity side, just recently, I don't know if anybody read the Ted Koppel's book, Lights Out, that he talks about cybersecurity and the impacts of the national grid impacts on it. They invited me to LA to be on a panel with him to discuss that book. So I'll give you the summary of the book is that we are not ready as a nation, and we have a lot of players from the Russians and the Koreans and the Iranians and the Chinese that are not, they don't have good intentions for them to actually gather intelligence and figure out a way to trigger a war. And this is no different than firing a bullet. Firing a cybersecurity bullet is starting a war. We have the capabilities, from a national perspective, but as a utility, my experience in LA was that every time we had figured out a way that a bad actor can penetrate the system, we were behind. If we are responding to what we know, we already are behind. So my approach in LA was I've hired probably many of these consultants that were in this business. They were 3 steps ahead of what was going on and figuring out the vulnerability of the system. So we had set up the protections of our SCADA system was done very tightly. We have penetrated the system. We have done all kinds of testing on the system. But one thing that we did that probably not too many utilities have done in LA, we had paralleled the entire system on a separate track, and we kept it cold. So everything on the parallel system was kept cold. This is, if you read anything about the Ukrainian attack that has happened, and I've studied it in very detail, they didn't have a backup system for them to go back, and everything was manual on their restoration. It took them about 6 months to restore the system back up. We've done this in LA 15 years ago, where we figured out if any of these measures that we have are penetrated, we have a emergency shut-off that we will do, and then we will kill the system that we're on, and we'll switch over to a cold system and have. So we've done these scenarios of, pretty sophisticated attacks that could paralyze the system, and what we do in order for us to restore the system. We had run the scenarios of if we have the first defense line penetrated and crippled, and then we have the second line of defense penetrated and crippled, what we would do on a manual basis to restore power, because 5 million people depends on that electricity. You have, security issues, health issues, all those things that we wanted to make sure that as a city we were ready. When I came to Colorado Springs Utilities, the same paranoia I had, and it's good paranoia. Having a paranoia is a good thing in this case, because someday something is going to happen, and I don't want to be the one. I don't want it to be on my watch. So I lose sleep over it, personally. I think about it, I put resources on it, and we'll figure it out. It's done. We have the resources, and the issue that I see is kind of relaxing your defense mechanisms to say that I've done it, I'm going to go do something else. There's no such thing in the utility business. To answer your second question, I don't know if I answered the question, the first part. To answer your second question, this is what I see. You said something that I want to kind of clarify. Is our boards are elected official, and I don't see myself. I don't see the questions that they ask. It is my duty to make sure that I'm there with them, because I have the expertise and the staff have the expertise in that area. I love the questions they ask. We have probably, from my experience over 38 years, our board is extremely caring, knowledgeable, and they ask lots of questions. And every one of those things is a healthy thing, because our job is to give them the information and put the options in front of them and give them the advice of what we think. And again, those are all taken into account in a bigger picture of what the city is going to work. I think it's a healthy structure that we have, and we have good checks and balances that has worked great, in my opinion.
Great, Phil. Thanks for that question. From my perspective, community utilities have a built-in advantage because of the connection with everyone. Now, there's three particular steps that I look at. First is obviously taking advantage, as I said, of end-of-grid, end-of-pipe technologies. The second is taking advantage to understand where we're going in the marketplace. But the third one is also to look internally. At WAPA, what we've done over the past 3.5 years is to drive $55 million of cost out through continuous process improvement. And that was critical for two reasons. One is to make sure that we are as efficient as we can to keep rates low and to lower them. In fact, we ended up lowering rates, including for Colorado Springs, for about 70% of our customers. But more importantly, what we did was we created some headroom in the budgets to make sure we can make the investments necessary out into the future. Let's face it, whether it's water, wastewater, electric or gas, we've got to be sure that we're investing properly. So how did we look at that? Well, we developed 10-year capital plans. And I recognize for those of you who are CPAs or accountants out there, it's really hard to project 10 years. But we do know and understand what's going to be necessary moving forward into the future. We also have to take advantage of the cross-platforms that we have. For example, pumping water when it is most efficient on the utility side helps drive costs down. Now, I think the good news from my perspective over the next 10 to 15 years, because of the advent of renewables, because of what's happening in storage, quite frankly, what's also happening in the natural gas market, we're seeing a very low energy prices. So we've got to make sure that utilities is positioned to take advantage of that. The same thing on the water side. We've got to really understand the price of water is dearer and dearer all the time. So how do we manage the water facilities that we have in a better fashion? So to me, again, it's really three things: making sure you take advantage of what we have today, planning for the future, and driving costs out of the organization wherever we can.
We do enjoy low rates in Colorado Springs, but it's my experience, no matter what community you live in, if your rates are 2 cents, or 10 cents, or 30 cents, if you ask the average consumer, what do you think about your utility rates? They always say they're too high. So we've got to be vigilant. In a perfect world, we would have great diversity in our portfolio for power. We'd love to have that. But I see, kind of getting back to Robin's question at the beginning, over time, we will be adding more and more renewables to our portfolio and relying less and less on fossil fuels over the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that with technology, that will not result in increased prices for our customers. We have we do, in Colorado Springs, we do a 5-year look and a 20-year look. You do 10, split the difference or something. But in the 5-year look, we recently went through and decided, let's try to find a way, can we have 5 years of no electric base rate increases for our customers? And our first pass, we didn't get there. We did another pass this year, and I think we are there. So we're working hard to keep our electric rates where they are today and looking to add renewables at fixed prices. Our board will consider an RFP that we recently received. We'll consider potentially adding additional renewables on Wednesday of next week that are very, very good prices, some of the best prices I think I've seen for solar across the country. And so we'll continue to go in that direction, but we have to be mindful that our customers are not our checkbook. We need to be vigilant with cost.
So I'm going to be a little bit more detailed because I think your question is fundamentally very, very critical, because all the trends that you heard, we're going to go this way on the fuel and everything. So from a utility perspective, this is where the assets that we have can be leveraged against each other. So I'll give you specific examples of our water conveyance system that we have is a water system for water needs. But we have a storage facility to have a tank, that has these water as we move them through the system for water usage. We can synchronize those generation that we have during the peak hours of the day that we could generate and make better use of that value of that generation when we actually need it, because we are pegging those against the market and we can do it much cheaper. So the group that does that, this is again going to the human side. I think you were there yesterday. I touched on some of the training and some of the sophistication of the tools that we have and the analysis that we do is to actually put these resources when we are combining the fuel and the assets together. So you have the water system that could be maximized, if we synchronize it with the system. We are doing a major overhaul of our energy trading and risk management system, which runs scenarios on demand, on a routine basis that will optimize our system. We own a gas storage system, that with partnership with the CIG, that we will buy gas when the gas prices are very low, and we will pump it in the ground. And then when we see spikes in the market, we will go back to our storage and deplete the storage that we have for a fraction of the price that we have, so we can generate cheaper. At the end of the day, we have a system that our cost of, our system revenue requirements are the ones that are impacting our rates. The more we can optimize our revenue requirements from efficiencies perspective, it's not just fuel diversification, but actually leveraging all the assets that we have to make sure our total cost is kept low. And that takes training. When I came here, the focus was on hiring. We have bright people, we have great assets, from the human side, but the tools that we had were antiquated. So we're revamping those things, so the real-time feedback from the market and optimization is coming to the group, and we're making the right decisions, because at the end of the day, we're going to get the cheapest price. We go on the market and buy energy when it's cheaper for us to buy than to generate, if we can bring it in safely. So we're not all relying on fuel and our generation, but having those assets at the utilities gives us a huge flexibility for us to make that. But the eye should be on these revenue requirements all the time to make sure you're optimizing all your assets to make sure our revenue requirements are kept low. And on top of it, all the processes we have internally, we've talked in detail yesterday, those add up to your cost also. It's not all the fuel alone, but all the processes we do, everything we do internally needs to be value added. If we're wasting any of the resources internally, that again adds pressure on the rates. So that's how I would approach your question.
I think all of us would love to build a brand new pump storage facility right on the hills above here. The harsh reality is that the time that it takes and the environmental constraints really prohibit that. We currently operate the Mount Albert pumping station here in Colorado, which has a tremendous advantage to be able to store power. But I agree with both these folks. I mean, the bottom line is we can squeeze more efficiency out of the current distribution system. We can make sure as we link to a broader regional grid that we can take advantage of lower energy prices, more efficient energy prices, but in both directions. And the other thing which I will look into is there's been a bunch of work done on compressed air energy storage. I did a project 15 years ago down in Alabama, which compresses air at night, forces it into a salt cavern, and then comes back out and is used for generation. It actually is particularly good because it doesn't use water, so we know this water energy nexus. That said, I think we can operate the system more efficiently and get the effects that we want, especially as the grid broadens across the West.
Well, I know we're always looking at, are there opportunities to do something with pump storage? But it's a difficult thing to build a new pump storage facility. So I don't think we have any plans for anything in the near future outside of batteries for storage. Now we can do some things in operation of our facilities that give us a little bit of flexibility. It would be great if we had our Castaic pump storage plant somewhere on our system here in Colorado, but we don't, and I don't think there's any engineering studies going on to look to site or permit something like that.
I can give you the technical detail, but I just want to touch on it so you know that there are ways for us to actually beef up the system that we have in order for it to mimic a storage. So pump storage is a natural storage because it's a water conveyance issue and you use it for dual activity. So in LA we had 1,200 megawatts nameplate capacity on a pump storage facility that was built in 1975. We went in and did physical modification that added another 400 megawatts to the efficiency of the units themselves. So technology has come a long way, so there's more of these incremental repowering that we can do to squeeze more out of what we already have. So that's one area. But just the technology on the DC lines, like for example, the thyristors, and I can give you more details later on, the valves that are on the end of the DC line, they are natural batteries that you could use to make sure that they're absorbing the renewable, variation of the renewables. We've invested $100 million on a DC line that we had from Delta, Utah to LA by investing that technology for converting AC to DC that allows us to have a capacity like a shock absorber for us to add another 600 megawatts of wind, and that was the cheapest way for you to use it as a storage capacity while you're transmitting large amount of electrons long distances. So in the system, in LA had 90% of the DC line operation, so we have experience. The country that has more experience is Sweden for DC conversion, because they have to connect, across the ocean to Europe and make these systems work. So we've worked with SAE Brown Boveri engineers, to figure out a way to upgrade those valves that we had. In our system here, we have many of these opportunities to get incremental efficiencies in everything we do, whether it's a gas storage, whether it's a pump storage or even a tank. On Tesla at the Air Force Academy, we have a tank that we built the head of the water without impacting water, because the priority goes to water conveyance. So we will convey water first. But if we have an opportunity to store the tank in there so we can generate electricity at the right time, we're trying to fine-tune those kind of things, because at the peak where you have, like I was bringing the example of wind generation, when we had 92-degree temperature, the wind drops to zero. And then when the wind drops to zero, we have to get some resource that is fast-acting, like a hydro is a fast-acting one that we could ramp up and pick up that slack that we generated. But that's something that we have to worry about from a consumer perspective, from power quality and reliability. That's something that we want to make sure the consumers never know what we're doing behind the scenes, but these are all opportunities that we have to figure out.
Thanks for the question. I'm not an engineer and I don't play one on TV. I've just been very fortunate in my career to have lots of great peers, mentors, friends and bosses who've got tremendous technical backgrounds. Some of it has been by just assimilation of that data, but for me, most of my learning, particularly around these top engineering issues, came during my 8 years at the Electric Power Research Institute. I came in there, quite frankly, to help them with the marketing side of the business. I had worked in utilities, I had run energy efficiency programs, I ran the meter shop, designed demand-side management programs. But working at EPRI gave me an opportunity over the 8 years to get touch base with everything from water to nuclear, from coal generation to what the latest solar technologies was. That gave me a deep love and an understanding of all the great topics, quite frankly, and it's as much an avocation for me as it has been my vocation for the past almost 30 years. Today I'm extremely involved in the Electric Power Research Institute still, but now as a customer side, and help define their research portfolio. I'm involved in the American Public Power Association as they look at their DEED program, which is really the development activities that are going on. 3 weeks ago, I returned from CIGRE in France. CIGRE is the global conference where anybody who is engaged in, particularly on the electric side, but also water as well, huge presentations and papers. Being a student of the business, from my perspective, is critical, both from an engineering side and also to understand what are the implications for society of all these things. We can engineer perfect systems, but society is an imperfect user of those systems. So where I spent a lot of time and effort is to figure out, okay, it's one thing to put in intelligent metering in a system, in somebody's home, but what is that, and how does that individual interact with it? So it's been very fortunate for me. I've also done programs at Stanford and Dartmouth and the traditional executive world. But what I learned the most, quite frankly, is from my peers and colleagues and watching the great technological advances that these folks develop every single day and put in play all the time.
Well, I have an engineering degree and got my professional registration very early in my career, so I've had it a long time. I probably haven't stamped a drawing in many years. But in terms of staying current with the industry and how do you stay current in engineering, I mean, I think all of us spend early morning hours and late evening hours reading a number of journals that come out every day. They're summary articles, and I don't know how they pay for these things, but it sort of has capsules of all the things that are going on in the utility business. There's one's a focus on smart energy, one's a focus on renewables, one's a focus on cyber, some a focus on batteries, and I pay particular attention to the battery articles. I've been reading for 10 years that the major breakthrough is going to happen tomorrow. And I hope it does, but it hasn't yet. We do a lot of reading. One of the things I did when I came here, and I would talk to our techie guru engineering group, I said, I want you guys to put together a presentation for me every month of something cutting edge that you're studying. And so once a month they come in and wow me with some kind of data project that they're working on. And I think it's a way for me to learn. We're all lifetime learners, and I think you would expect that and you would demand that of a CEO. We really have to spend the time to keep on top of the business. We can do a lot of reading, and I find one of the best ways to learn is through associations. And APPA is a great one, LPPC, Large Public Power Council is another one. I just attended a meeting of that group last weekend. So the industry is changing dramatically, and we have to stay in touch. And it's really fun to see all of the change.
Thank you, Kurt. So there's many ways. I have the California professional engineering license that I got in way back. There's no requirement for continuing education per se to renew your license, so it's just a rollover, just paying the fees. But the new rules are that you have to have continuing education credits, so then you have to show that you're going to school to have the new requirements that the states require. Colorado has a reciprocity with California, so it's just a matter of applying and getting a Colorado license that they will recognize the California license. So that's the technical part of the. So as far as keeping up with the technology and what's going on, because in at least my exposure to issues is technical in nature, and I have to understand to a certain level of what the technology does, but without being the design engineer and actually the project manager going into the details, there's the need for us is more on the people side and on the policy side and all those other things, from regulation and compliance and all those things that we have to do. So a lot of education and a lot of going back to school. I just went to UCCS a couple months ago, did the mini MBA just to get into a class of 30 people and kind of renew your, so you never stop learning from that point of view. And I always are looking for opportunities to do, but 4 or 5 years ago, I went to Harvard Kennedy executive leadership class and kind of got the exposure of all the policy issues and leadership issues and all those things to kind of beef up that part. So there's a rotational need for touching on all those things, but because I'm a technical, I want to know, curiosity is something that is not going to go away. So reading like magazines, technical magazines, whether it's a power journal or the water resources journals or ENR, construction management and technology and different ways of delivering projects and stuff. It's always something that intrigues me, and I want to kind of pick and choose what ENR had an article this week on smart cities, which is something that they were bringing up, in Dubai. The entire city is electronically. There's no paper in anywhere. Any transaction you do with the government over there, it's all electronic. It's on-demand apps. Even their police department is all technology. We talk about AMI and stuff like that. That whole police department is built on electronic information, tablets, things that they're doing much more because they have the resources and they're small, so they can implement things. So those are things that intrigues me from a technology perspective, and kind of pick and choose what we can bring to the table here and kind of get educated on what's on the market. So.
I've mentioned a couple of times here the advancing trend towards a market. We've all been working very hard towards the Mountain West Transmission Group. It's taking a little bit of a hiatus right now until Xcel sorts all of these things out. Two things that are very important. First and foremost, we are going to get to a regional grid. The number one way that we can take advantage is in the regional grid. The second piece is certainly Xcel is going to have what I describe as plenty of excess power to sell at certain times of the day. So part of it is in the negotiations. I know Xcel is a big partner with CSU today. Personally, I've got great relations. Currently at WAPA, we deal a lot with Xcel Energy. We're all finding our way in this new world. So over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, we've got to be prepared to take advantage. That means a build out of transmission. It means linking into markets. We've all just moved into using the Southwest Power Pool for reliability coordinator. Not to get too technical, but we're going to deal with reserve sharing agreements with the Pacific Northwest. The market is changing and moving, and it's a question of staying on top, being at the table. You don't want to miss out the decisions that are occurring when it comes to these market expansions, and that's something very critical for us to do.
I think we're looking with interest at Xcel and their program, and I think the way that we can partner with them is as they look for renewable increases, I would like to reach out and see if there's opportunities for us to take a small piece of a big project that they're doing. They offer us economies of scale that we can't really do by ourselves. We're not really big enough to do a great big projects that get the lowest price. And today, it's really hard to get wind energy to Colorado Springs. Many people, when I go out and talk in the community, they say, why don't you have wind? Well, we ask for wind bids all of the time, and even though the bid may be good, the cost to transmit it and get it into our service territory usually takes it out of the money. So if we could find some way to partner with Xcel on some renewable projects that they have, I think that's a way we can work together in the future.
I'll answer your question in two parts. The regionalization, so I'll just briefly explain the benefits of having regionalization assets that benefit the neighboring utilities. So right now the U.S. postal stamp is 45 cents and you can put it on an envelope and it goes anywhere in U.S. territory for the same price. The transmission system that we have right now has different postage stamps across boundaries. And the issue that we have is combining 6 or 7 regions and having one postage stamp that we can move electrons across is a good thing to have, because that gives you the flexibility of moving things around without worrying about congestion and other things that will, vary your costs. That's one thing. The second thing is, this is strategic because I see myself, I have to protect the city of Colorado Springs' interests first, and then I will look for opportunities for other things, because Xcel Energy's rate system is governed by a PUC, the Public Utility Commission, and they can recover their cost much more differently than the way we recover the cost here. Our rates are set by our council. Our city council sets our rates, and we have to make sure we're aware of that flexibility that they have, that probably is not something that we want to jump in and figure out a way to adjust our rates. I think what's going to happen in the future is, as the renewables, 3,000 megawatts of coal being shut down is going to put pressure on the supply side and actually balancing the renewable increase that they have. Xcel Energy is going to put a lot of resources on their system to make sure they're pumping the system on their end to make sure we can get the energy from the wind or anything else coming into. The rate, the driver of what the rates are going to be is not going to be the generation of electricity. It's going to be the rate that you pay to balance that load. So for example, if you're buying wind for 3 cents, you might end up paying on top of it 2 more cents in order for you to absorb the shock of that renewable energy. So the market is going to move towards not the energy because it's free energy, because you already paid for it. The wind and the solar is paid for. They're going to generate when they want to generate. Where you're going to pay your rates are on the pumping side, on the balancing side of it. And we have to be smart in Colorado Springs Utility to make sure that we are not at the mercy of the market for us to pay that part without having choices on our end to make sure that we're balancing the rates on our end. Strategically, that is a very critical direction that we have to move, and we have to have assets to make sure we're not taken hostage. Because if we go there with no choices, we have to pay market prices, and that might be higher than what we could do internally. So that's how I would approach that problem.
It's a little difficult not being inside the organization and coming up with it. But I can tell you the first 3 things that I would look at. Number 1 is transparency. I think we need to get more information out there. I can tell you, somebody doing due diligence on the organization, there's lots of information, but the way that it's presented makes it very challenging to understand as an outsider. Insider in the sense that I know what's going on in water, electric, and gas. So that's number 1. Number 2, I make sure that we've got a continuous process improvement team and make sure that they're really focused on understanding how do we drive costs out of the organization, how do we be more efficient. And number 3, really to deal with the comment that Eric made, I want to make sure that there's an active change management program. There's a great statement out there that says, I'm all for progress, it's change I can't stand. And organizations need to be prepared for change, regardless of which one of us gets it. So to really have change agents within the organization, make sure that they're trained to help transition to however that new future rolls out.
You should have already made it.
Well, I'll address that. As the acting CEO, I really didn't feel like I should make organizational changes that if I was not the permanent, somebody might want to come in and undo what I had just done. So I have not made organizational changes in this 4-month period. I have been out talking to our customers. I've been talking with our employees. I've been working on a number of items. In terms of changes, I think we're a little bit behind on some IT systems that need to be updated. We need to move quickly. We're just hiring a new manager for that area. So I'd like to see us accelerate some of the IT changes that are tremendously necessary, and we need everybody on board to help make those changes effective, because it's going to benefit all of the company. There are some organizational changes that I would make, but what I have found in the business is if I stand up here and I say I want to change and I name a group, all of the people in that group freak out. And I'd rather not name groups until I'm selected. But there are a few places where I think organizational changes could make us more effective.
I'll answer your question directly. So I'm not afraid of making those announcements now because I'm not the CEO. So I'll make them and I'll deal with them. Organization, alignment is number one for me. So looking at the organization, the first 24 hours is the first thing that I would do to make sure that the organization is aligned properly. There are very red flags right now that I would say, in my opinion, are buried in the organization that should be elevated. Number one being the human resource division cannot be buried in 3 layers below the organization. That is the number one critical element that should be visible to the CEO, and the CEO needs to be extremely involved in the human resource side, whether it's recruiting, hiring, training, alignment, and allowing for positions to be realigned or rededicated in that thing. So that's number one. Number two, technology. I think, this is my opinion, we are at the danger zone right now on the technology advancements that we are losing time from a utility perspective, and I would make sure that visibility comes to the CEO level also, because if we don't make that a priority and we don't figure out how technology needs to be across 4 services, not individualized and siloed, across 4 services, and we need to make the customer as the centric of our systems. So I don't want the customer to be dealing with 4 utilities as if like there's 4 companies having different processes in there. That's going to add more cost on your side. I want to streamline the process on the technology side so the employees can deliver the services. Our focus is to deliver those 4 services the best value that we can add to it. So HR and IT, and the last is the communication with the city direction and the economic development and everything else we do. We have tons of room to grow in that area, and I want to make sure that the utility has that character of humbleness, of being part of the community, being there to serve the customers and the growth and where we're going to be. Those are the 3 areas that I would say are priority as soon as I have the job.